The email arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday. Priya Nair had been awake since 6 that morning, which made this hour 17 and a half of a day that had been, by any reasonable measure, too long. She was a second-year computer science graduate student at the University of Denver, working a 20-hour-per-week research assistantship that paid her tuition and a stipend that covered her rent by the margin of $400 each month, which was enough as long as nothing unexpected happened, and nothing unexpected had happened in 11 months, which she counted as a form of grace. She was sitting at the kitchen table of the studio apartment she shared with no one, because sharing required a lease cosigner, and she did not have one, eating instant noodles she had made 40 minutes ago and had let go cold because she had been absorbed in a problem that was not the problem she was supposed to be working on. The problem she was supposed to be working on was her advisor's research project, a natural language processing pipeline that was due for a milestone review in 3 weeks and that she had been making steady progress on. The problem she had been absorbed in instead was a different one, a smaller one, a practical one that had nothing to do with her research and everything to do with the part-time job she had taken 4 months ago at a small nonprofit called the Colorado Family Resource Network. The nonprofit connected low-income families with public assistance programs, benefits, eligibility, housing resources, food assistance, child care subsidies. It was necessary work, done by 12 people on a budget that required every dollar to justify itself several times over. It was also drowning in paper. Priya had been hired as a part-time data entry coordinator. The role paid $14 an hour and involved, primarily, the manual input of client intake forms into the organization's database, a process that consumed approximately 60% of the organization's administrative capacity and produced, despite this consumption, a database that was consistently incomplete because the volume of incoming forms exceeded the speed at which they could be processed. Families waited. Benefits were delayed. Caseworkers spent hours every week on the phone explaining that their information was still being processed rather than using those hours to connect people with the resources they needed. Priya had been doing the data entry for 4 months. She was fast. Her typing speed was above average and her accuracy was precise, but fast and precise were not sufficient to address a structural problem. The problem was not the speed of individual data entry. The problem was the volume relative to the capacity, which was a gap that no individual's speed could close. She had been thinking about this for the full 4 months. On the Thursday night when the email arrived, she had spent 3 hours building a prototype of something she had been designing in her head. The prototype was an automated intake processing system. It used optical character recognition to read scanned intake forms, a classification model to categorize the fields, and a validation layer to flag incomplete or inconsistent entries for human review. It was not sophisticated by the standards of the natural language processing work she did in her research. It was practical, targeted, and built from components she knew how to assemble, because she had been assembling similar components in her research for 18 months. The email that arrived at 11:47 p.m. was from her advisor, Dr. Sandra Park, asking about the milestone review timeline. Priya read the email. She noted it to respond to in the morning. She went back to the prototype. She worked until 4:15 a.m. The prototype worked. Not perfectly, it was a first build, and first builds are never perfect. The OCR misread certain handwritten fields at a rate that required more human review than she wanted. The classification model had gaps in its training data that produced incorrect categorizations for a specific subset of form types. The validation layer was functional but not comprehensive. But it worked in the essential sense. It processed forms. It processed them at a speed that was approximately 40 times faster than manual data entry, with an accuracy rate, accounting for the fields flagged for human review, that was comparable to the manual process and could be improved with additional training data. 40 times faster. She sat with this number for a moment. Then she went to bed at 4:23 a.m., slept for 3 hours, woke at 7:30, ate cereal she did not taste, and went to her RA shift at the university before her afternoon shift at the nonprofit. She brought her laptop. The executive director of the Colorado Family Resource Network was a woman named Gloria Reyes, who had been running nonprofits for 22 years and had developed, through those 22 years, a particular quality of attention to the gap between what her organization needed and what it had. She lived in this gap professionally. She managed it, resourced around it, made peace with it, occasionally made progress on it. She was not a person who was surprised by constraints. She was, however, a person who was surprised by Priya Nair on a Friday afternoon. Priya had asked for 15 minutes. She had sent the request through the normal channel, an email to Gloria's assistant, professional in its phrasing, specific about the agenda. I have built a tool that I think could help with our intake processing backlog, and I would like to show it to you. Gloria had given her the 15 minutes. Priya spent the first 5 showing the prototype. She brought 3 sample intake forms, real forms with identifying information redacted, and ran them through the system while Gloria watched. The forms were processed in 11 seconds each. The fields were populated correctly. 2 fields across the 3 forms were flagged for human review. She spent the next 5 explaining the limitations and what would be required to address them. Additional training data for the classification model, an expansion of the validation layer's rule set, and testing across a fuller range of form types before deployment. She spent the last 5 answering Gloria's questions. Gloria asked 7 questions in 5 minutes. They were specific, practical, and demonstrated that she had understood everything Priya had shown her. When the 15 minutes were done, Gloria said, "How long did it take you to build this?" "The first version," Priya said, "took 1 night. The training and testing to get it to deployment ready will take longer, probably 3 to 4 weeks, working alongside my regular schedule." Gloria looked at her. "Your regular schedule," she said, "which includes this job and a graduate research assistantship." "Yes." "When did you build the first version?" "Last night," Priya said, "after my shift here." Tell us in the comments where in the world you are listening to this story from. If HeartLine Stories has moved you today, please like, subscribe, and share this channel. Every subscriber tells us to keep these stories coming. Now, back to Gloria and Priya, and the 15-minute meeting that was about to go considerably over time. Gloria asked for another 30 minutes. They spent it on the details, the infrastructure requirements, the data privacy considerations that a client-facing organization had to navigate carefully, the training data sourcing, the timeline, the resource implications. Priya had thought through most of this already, because she had been thinking about the problem for 4 months and had been designing the solution in her head for 2 of them. Where she had not thought it through, she said so directly and described what she would need to find out. At the end of the 30 minutes, Gloria said, "What do you need from us to complete the development?" Priya had prepared for this question. "Access to a historical dataset of processed forms for model training," she said. 1,000 forms would be sufficient to significantly improve the classification accuracy. And time with one of your senior caseworkers to map the edge cases that the validation layer needs to handle. I can identify most of them from the data, but a caseworker's knowledge of what goes wrong in practice is something the data alone will not capture." "That is all?" "That is all I need from you," Priya said. "I have what I need for the rest." Gloria looked at her for a moment. "You are a second-year graduate student working a part-time data entry job," she said. "Yes." "You built a system last night that could replace most of the work of our data entry function." "Not replace," Priya said. "Redirect. The people doing data entry are also doing other things, and there will always be cases that need human judgment. The system handles the routine. The people handle the exceptions and the relationships." Gloria noted this distinction. She filed it as the distinction of someone who understood organizational reality, not just technical capability. 3 to 4 weeks, she said. "Yes," Priya said. if the training data is available and the caseworker conversation happens in the first week. Done, Gloria said. The system went into deployment 31 days later. The development had not been without difficulty. The OCR accuracy on handwritten fields improved significantly with the training data, but not completely. Priya ended up redesigning the flagging protocol to route handwritten fields more efficiently to human review, which was a better solution than trying to eliminate the limitation entirely. The validation layer, informed by 2 conversations with a senior caseworker named Maria, who had been processing intake forms for 9 years and knew every edge case by their first name, became substantially more comprehensive than the original version. The classification model, after training on 1,147 historical forms, Gloria had managed to find 147 more than Priya had asked for, because Gloria always tried to give people slightly more than they asked for, achieved an accuracy rate of 91% on standard form types and 84% on specialized forms. 84 and 91% were not perfect. In combination with the human review protocol, the effective accuracy of the processed output was 97%, which was 3 percentage points higher than the manual process and 40 times faster. The impact on the organization was visible within the first 2 weeks of deployment. The intake processing backlog, which had been running at an average of 11 days when Priya had started her data entry job 4 months earlier, fell to 2 days within the first week and to less than 1 day by the end of the second. Caseworkers who had been spending 30 to 40% of their time on status calls, explaining to families that their information was still being processed, redirected that time to client services. 3 caseworkers who had been managing the manual data entry process full-time moved into expanded client-facing roles that the organization had not previously had the capacity to staff. Families got faster answers. Caseworkers did the work they had been hired to do. Gloria wrote about it in the organization's quarterly update to its funders. Carefully, specifically, without hyperbole, because Gloria believed that funders deserved accurate information, and that accurate information was the foundation of trust. She described what the system did, what it had changed, and who had built it. She described a second-year graduate student who had been doing data entry for 4 months, had noticed a structural problem, and had spent a night building the beginning of a solution. One of the organization's funders was a technology-focused philanthropic foundation whose program officer, a man named David Chen, read the quarterly update on a Monday morning and forwarded it to his foundation's director with a note that said, "This is exactly the kind of thing we should be supporting." The foundation reached out to Gloria 2 weeks later. The conversation that followed produced a grant, the organization's largest single grant in its 11-year history, specifically designated for technology infrastructure and including funding for a half-time technology coordinator role. Gloria offered the role to Priya. Priya was in her advisor's office when the call came. Dr. Park watched her take the call, watched her face change as she listened, and when Priya hung up and looked at her with an expression that was complex and slightly overwhelmed, Dr. Park said, "Tell me," Priya told her. Dr. Park was quiet for a moment. "You built this in 1 night," she said. "The first version," Priya said. "The rest took a month." "After your other shifts?" "Yes." "Because you had been thinking about the problem for 4 months?" "Yes." "And you are telling me this is not related to your research?" Priya looked at her. "It uses similar components," she said carefully. Dr. Park smiled. It was small and genuine. "Take the role," she said. "We will figure out the research hours. The dissertation will wait. This will not." Priya accepted the role. She restructured her assistantship hours with Dr. Park's support. Fewer hours, more focused, the research advancing more slowly but still advancing. She spent the following 6 months expanding the intake processing system to handle additional form types, integrating it with the organization's case management database in ways that had not been possible before, and beginning the design of a second system, a benefits eligibility navigator that could help caseworkers identify which programs a given client was likely to qualify for, reducing the research time that currently consumed approximately 2 hours per new client intake. She did this work with the same quality she had brought to the first night. Carefully, practically, with the specific focus of someone who knows that the system she is building is not an academic exercise, but the thing that determines whether a family waits 11 days for an answer or one. On a Thursday evening in the 11th month of her time at the organization, she sat at the same kitchen table where she had started the first prototype, eating dinner that was not instant noodles. She had a slightly better grocery budget now, and thinking about the eligibility navigator. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maria, the senior caseworker who had spent 2 afternoons with Priya mapping the edge cases of the validation layer. The text said, "Family came in today. Single mom, 3 kids. We processed her intake in 4 minutes and got her connected to 3 programs same day. She cried. I thought you should know." Priya read the text. She put the phone down. She ate her dinner. Then she opened her laptop and got back to work. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that the most important problems are often the ones closest to you, already visible, already real, waiting for someone to care enough to fix them, please share it with someone today. And if you have a story of your own, write to us at heartlinestories@gmail.com. Every heart has a story worth telling. This is HeartLine Stories, where yours matters.